In this video, I'm going to be breaking down the fantastic strategy article, Drafting the Correct Way by Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. This article came out in 2024, but it's sometimes hard to find articles these days, even when they're fantastic and relatively recent, so I wanted to shine some light on it, provide some extra context and perspective on some of the points he makes, as well as just give it more exposure because it's a great read written by one of the best Magic players ever. If you've never heard of Paulo, he's a world champion, he's a Pro Tour champion, he's won at every level of the game, and he also writes fantastic strategy articles, so he really does do a lot to help you get better. He doesn't really play as much these days, but he is a fantastic resource. If you ever see anything written by him, it's usually worth a read. Okay, drafting the correct way. Do you take the red or the blue pill? How to know when you should stay open and when you should commit to your colors by Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa. This piece by Paulo, Vitor, Damo, Rosa reframes Limited's central dilemma, stay open or commit, into a single mandate, draft the correct way. Rather than memorizing rules, he weighs context to decide when to take the solid in-color card and when to speculate. The article focuses on 1. The dilemma recast. From the red versus blue pick to Ben Stark's drafting the hard way, PVDDR contrasts immediate value with future upside, noting recent pro debate and urging flexibility over dogma. 2. Format depth and value above replacement. In deep formats, many playables, the cost of speculation is low. What matters isn't raw card strength, but the delta versus your next best option, your value above replacement. Many formats these days are more classified as deep formats because the average card has gotten much better over time. There are no longer cards that are like, generally, there are no longer cards that are just basically unplayable. Whereas in older formats in particular, there would be cards like a 2-mana do-nothing enchantment that just comes around at the end of the pack and has no chance of fitting into anybody's deck. So these days, a lot of formats are more deep formats, and so you can afford to speculate a little bit more. What he means by delta versus your next best option is, like, if you don't take a card, like, what's the 23rd card that's going to fit into your deck instead? And a lot of the times that'll be like a 4-mana 3/4 with some upside or something like that. Whereas in the past, it used to be like you'd rather play a basic land than the last card that you would put in your deck. Things like that. 3. Replaceability of roles. Pick orders should reflect how easily a card's effect can be filled later. A 5-mana 6/6 looks great until you realize there are multiple common 5-drops or abundant 5 damage removal, changing its true premium. So what he's saying here is, but when he mentions the 5 damage removal, is that if there's a lot of removal spells in the format that deal 5 damage, then 6 toughness is a little bit of a premium. So maybe the 5-mana 6/6 is better than the 5-mana 5/4 with a little upside or something like that, just because 6 toughness may be good. So it's like roles. It's like, okay, if cheap removal's at a premium, like there's only one good removal spell that's cheap, you have to take that a little bit higher. But if there's like 3 or 4, you don't have to prioritize it. Or maybe white has one good 2-drop, so you really have to prioritize it. Or maybe it has 3 good 2-drops and you don't have to prioritize it as much. So replaceability is a big thing. 4. Synergy and multicolored payoffs. The more synergy driven the set, tribal, which is now called kindred, gold cards, which is another word for multicolored cards, like a blue-red card would be a blue-red-gold card, the bigger the reward for finding the open lane, because powerful pieces are desired by fewer seats, not by everyone in the color. So basically, if you have a set that's very synergy-based, there can be, say, a red card that is really, really powerful in one archetype. Like maybe it's really good in red-blue, but the red-white deck has no interest whatsoever, so you get more rewarded for finding your open lane, because if you are the only red-blue drafter, you can get that red card really late and it's really strong. Whereas if it's less of a synergy set and it's just generically powerful red cards, generically powerful green cards, etc., then it's less of a reward for finding the open lane because you're not going to get as many strong cards late by finding the right archetype. 5. Anchors, flatness, and tabling. The better your current pool and the flatter the rest of the set, the more you should commit. And when he says current pool, he means the cards you have already drafted. So if you have 4 cards drafted, that's your current pool. And so that he's saying if the flatter the rest of the set, the more you should commit. Track what might table, which means the cards that'll come back around on the wheel. So you see the packs multiple times because there's 8 players in the pod. You have 14 picks in a play booster. And so you'll be able to see the same pack once it comes back around. And so that's what he means when he says something that tables. Then apply PVDDR's heuristics. Speculate more in deep synergy heavy formats, less when playables are scarce, generically powerful, or your in-color role is irreplaceable. So what he's saying here is that when you have these sets that are more synergy focused and have a lot of more cards that are playable, so you're not going to get as punished for being a little bit short on playables, then you can speculate more because you want to find that open lane so you can get those strong cards late. But in the opposite scenario where maybe the set is a little bit weaker or flatter power level, or the cards just aren't as like specific to the homes they go in, then you aren't going to get as many payoffs late. So you can weight yourself a little bit more heavily towards your early picks and be like, well, my first 4 cards are good, and even if these colors aren't the most open, I'm not going to see anything better later, so might as well commit. It's the first draft of the Pro Tour. You open up your pack, and the best card is clear to you, a powerful red uncommon. You take it. The next pack has a good white common as the clear best card, so you take that. In the third pack, Jackpot, you find a very powerful Signpost red-white uncommon. You're, as the kids would say, Bing chillin'. Asterisk, I don't know what this means either, but my understanding is that it's a good state to be in. Then the fourth pack rolls around. There's a reasonable red card in it, one you'd be happy to play, if not thrilled, but there's also a more powerful blue card. What now? So now we're getting into the red versus blue pill thing he mentioned. None of your testing has provided you the answer for this exact moment. Sure, you know the power level of all the cards and archetypes. You know that the blue card is better than the red card, and you know that blue-white, blue-red, and white-red are all reasonable archetypes of similar power levels. But for this particular decision, you can't know the answer beforehand. You've never been faced with this exact scenario, and you will likely never be faced with it again. That's part of the beauty of draft, is that it's so different every single time because your deck is never the same. You're always facing different decisions. It makes it a lot of fun. This is one of the most important and hardest decisions you will make in this draft, and it appears in almost every draft, sometimes multiple times per draft. The struggle between staying in your lane and being flexible will always exist. It's hard to solve specifically because it's not something you can just memorize. There are just too many variables involved that will make the right decision different each time. What you can do, however, is try to understand which factors should lead you towards being more or less flexible. Also, the reason he highlights Fire and Ice is because it's a pretty flexible card. If you turn your head sideways to read it, you can see that it is either deal 2 damage, divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets, and then Ice is tap target permanent, draw a card. And so if you're playing a blue-red deck, you get option either mode, and if you're playing a blue deck, you can use one mode, or red mode deck, you can do the other mode. So a flexible card. That's why he highlighted it there, because it's a flexible thing. Drafting the Hard Way by Ben Stark. It's another fantastic article. I have already covered it on this channel, so you can find my breakdown of that article as well, but he's going to be talking about it here. Many years ago, Ben Stark wrote what is, in my opinion, the most important drafting article of all time, Drafting the Hard Way. I think I might have called it the best draft article ever written, so if you're looking for it, then you can find it there. Lately, there has been some Twitter buzz in the pro MTG community about the merits or demerits of the Drafting the Hard Way strategy in light of recent design paradigms, with some very successful players claiming the strategy is outdated and other equally successful players saying it holds true to this day. If you've never heard of Drafting the Hard Way, the basic concept, if I had to distill it in like 10 seconds, is that you need to weigh the probability of a card making your deck versus the card's power level. So if you have a really strong card that you like take early, you need to be willing to move away from it if you think that the combined value of cards in like a different color is going to be greater than that card plus all of the mediocre cards in that color if it's not open. So you have to be flexible, you stay open, you look for the open lanes, you find the open colors, and you're always weighing the odds of a card making your deck versus the power level of that card, and being willing to move off of cards much more. It's often associated with staying very open and looking and reading signals. Though the article itself is very in-depth and very, very good. So I recommend checking that one out. Anyway, Drafting the Hard Way is simply an outdated framework born of outdated heuristics. Specifically, it was meant for formats where not finding the right lane often led to train wrecks, but in modern limited sets, the large number of playables means you rarely ever train wreck. And then J.E. Duprat, John Emmanuel Duprat, he is a Match of the Gathering world champion, a really good player, obviously. This is going to be a controversial take, but it feels like more and more people need to hear it. If you find the Hard Way as a framework for draft outdated, there's a good chance that you don't understand what it means. Note that both of these tweets are part of a long and informative threads, and I merely took out the most inflammatory parts for dramatic effect. If you are interested in the topic, I recommend going through Twitter and reading the full context of what Jason and JED have to say about it. I don't want to get too bogged down on definitions, but at its core, the philosophy is about immediate gains, the card that makes your deck the best now versus possible future gains, the card that might allow you to play a more powerful deck down the line. It's not only the red card versus the blue card, it's solidifying yourself in a red deck versus leaving the door open to playing a blue deck. I'm going to use colors for my examples here because it's easiest to grasp, but it could also mean a card that's part of a specific strategy inside of a color when you don't know if you're going to be able to follow that strategy or not. Okay. Will you choose hard or easy? There are pros and cons to both choices. So he color coded them. If you take the red card, you will have selected a card that you will very likely play, and it will likely improve the final product, whereas with the blue card, you're specifically selecting a card that you will likely not play and making your deck weaker in the process. You also cut red more, so you lower the risk of your neighbor deciding to move into red and getting your cards in pack too. Though I will say, as a general concept, you should worry a lot less about the cards you're passing than about the cards you're receiving, because generally once you settle into a deck, the person next to you isn't going to be able to get into your deck, and you can't really control them as much as you might think anyway, because if they first pick a certain card, they might go down a different path than you might logically think anyway. Anyway, your draft will be more comfortable. You're likely going to take red and white cards the rest of the draft, and you will end up with a solid deck. There's not a lot of room to mess up. All in all, it's easier to know what colors you are than to not know, and easier, contrary to popular belief, is a good thing. Okay, so that's the benefits of taking the red card. You stick to your red-white deck. You're probably going to get to take red-white cards the rest of the way. There's not a lot of room to mess up because you're just going to draft red-white cards. And he's saying that it's easier to know what colors you are than to not know, and easier is a good thing because it leaves you like, you don't have to worry, like use as much brain power and things like that, which can be beneficial, especially over the course of a long tournament where you need all of your brain power for a lot of key moments. The benefits of the blue pick. If you pick the blue card, you lose all of the above, but you gain in future possibilities. You are basically paying a price for your red deck for the potential to end up with a completely different deck that is better. Maybe, just maybe, there is a super strong blue deck for the grabs on the table. And if you take the blue card here, that deck can be yours. If you do not take the blue card and you see a strong blue card again next pick, you can of course still change, but it becomes harder and harder each time because now the cost is bigger. You're giving up more red cards, and the reward is smaller. You missed out on one card already, and you likely sent someone else into blue with a late signal. So there are pros and cons to each one. You make the current deck you have better, which is beneficial if you end up playing that deck. But the downside is you don't leave yourself open to playing the blue deck that might be better than the red deck that you could have drafted. So those are the two pros and cons. Okay. If you don't take the blue card now, you might be doomed to find an amazing blue card in every pack that pass you by you as you take a mediocre red card in its place, fantasizing about the insane blue deck your neighbor is probably going to beat you with that could have been yours. So that's in pod play. You play against the people in your pod, so they could beat you with the deck very easily. What's next? At the same time, navigating the draft from here will be harder. What if the next pick is the same, except the best card is green? What if you then followed up with a red card, then another white card, and you think you're red-white again, only for another blue card to show up? Giving up one playable in your colors is never going to be the end of the world, but do it enough times and it's death by 1,000 cuts. So of course he highlights wall of 1,000 cuts here. At some point, you need to find the moment where you stop speculating and commit to something, and finding that moment can be very hard as well. The wall of 1,000 cuts is funny. Defender flying, it can attack, so it didn't have defender, just 5-minute 3/5 flyer thing. Okay. Anyway, so in the end, do you take the red card or the blue card? Do you draft the easy way or the hard way? The reality is that you should draft the correct way. Boom, new level up phrase here. And sometimes that's going to be the easy way. Sometimes it's going to be the hard way. Pigeonholing yourself into either of these strategies up front is inevitably going to lead to failure because the correct way to draft changes depending on a variety of factors that are unique to each specific format and situation. Also, I like that this article uses cards. It might just be that they showed fire and ice not because it's a flexible card, but because it's a blue and a red card, and he's talking about blue and red cards. I mean, that would make sense with the wall of 1,000 cuts being with death by 1,000 cuts, and him talking about which factors and then showing the card risk factor, which is a card that you pretty much should not be ever playing in draft. But it was kind of solid and constructed sometimes. But we're not talking about that here. But it's kind of funny how the cards that they have chosen are not from the article itself. They're just for the points, which is hilarious. Anyway. Which factors? That's what I'm going to talk about today. So he shows off risk factor. Factor 1, how deep is the card pool in the format? So now we're going to go through those 5 points that he talked about at the top. Some formats have so many playable cards that the last pick of the draft is always something you would be okay playing. There are no bad cards. We call those deep formats. So of course he shows deep analysis. In contrast, there are formats in which by the time a pack wheels, the best card of the 6 remaining is 4 and a red, destroy a non-basic land. These are shallow formats, and that's an example of a card you would never play. So he's showing it as a shallow format because the cards that you wheel aren't cards you want to play, and so you have less options with which to get your 23 spells that are going to supplement your 17 lands in a typical draft deck. In the thread I quoted, the amount of playable cards in a format directly corresponds to how much speculating you're allowed to do. In the thread I quoted, Jason talks about how the current MTG design lends itself to sets that have an abundance of playables most of the time, which is something I agree with. And this article, as I said, was written relatively recently in 2024. So it's talking about the current era of limited with play boosters and things like that. Jason then says that the logical consequence of that is that drafting the hard way is outdated because the goal of the strategy is to avoid train wrecks, and train wrecks simply do not happen when every card is playable. This is the part I do not agree with. To me, being flexible is not about avoiding train wrecks. In fact, it's quite the opposite. The more flexible you try to be, the more picks you spend on future gains that will likely not be realized. If at the end of pack 1 you have 3 cards in each color, then that's probably around 9 picks that you spent on cards you will definitely not play. It's impossible for all of those bets to pay off. So if you have 3 of each color, that's 5 colors, that's 15 cards. You really only get 14 cards in a modern play booster, but the point stands. You're not going to be able to play the majority of the cards you have because you have 3 in each color and you're going to be playing a 2-color deck most of the time. Contrast that to someone who has 10 red cards at the end of pack 1, and it's easy to see which person is more likely to have a train wreck. So the reason to stay open is not to avoid train wrecks, but to reap the rewards of powerful picks very late. Value above replacement. Normally, when we think of draft cards, we assign them a value, which is a mix of the card's power level and the chance you play the card in your final deck. This is why it's common to pick a colorless card with power level 7 over a multicolored card with power level 8 as your first pick. The colorless card is less powerful, but will always make your deck, whereas the multicolored card might make your deck less than 50% of the time. Because if you just think about it, if you have, there's 10 archetypes with 10 of the 2 color pairs, that means that you can play like red, white, red, green, red, blue, red, black. That's 4 of the 10 archetypes, so it's less than 50% of the time. That's what he says. A lot of the time, if you take a strong card, it'll bias you towards those colors, so it's maybe higher than 50%, but that's the point he's making. Multicolored. Oh, he's saying multicolored card. Okay. So multicolored cards, if it's just red, black, obviously that makes sense. Where it's like, oh, if I start with a red, black, gold card, multicolored card, I'm much less likely to play that because it fits only into one of the 10 archetypes. And even if I bias towards it, it's still not going to be like 50% of the time. And with the monocolored cards, it's slightly higher, but with colorless cards, it's almost a guarantee that you'll play it if it's a really strong one. And so that's why it's like the variety of being willing to take a multicolored card lower than a single colored card, and then colorless cards get the highest priority of all. Anyway, however, this is not the complete way to think about this. In reality, it doesn't matter how good a card is. It only matters how good it is compared to whatever else you would play instead. This is a concept that we call value above replacement, and it's crucial that you understand it. Imagine you have a card that you're very likely to play and whose value is a 6.5. That's a reasonable pick, not a slam dunk, but it'll basically always make your deck and you'll be happy with it. Seems like something you should pick over something that is speculative, such as a card in a color you will likely not play. There is, however, one variable missing from here, without which it is impossible to make your decision. How good is the card you would end up playing in your final deck if you didn't pick that original card? The key here is that this card doesn't add 6.5 in value to your deck. It adds the delta between 6.5 and the value of the best card you are not playing. And delta is another word for difference that's commonly used in mathematics. So 6.5 minus the value of whatever the other card is. If the best card that's going to remain in your sideboard is a 6.3 value card, then the value of this pick is only 0.2. What you are giving up by speculating here and picking a card you might not play is not 6.5 of value, it's 0.2 of value. So basically, because you're only going to be playing 23 spells, 17 lands, if you have like a decent card in your sideboard that would have been instead of this card that you're taking, then that card, the difference isn't 6.5 versus 0, because it's not like you're not going to play a card instead. It's however good the difference is. So that's why he's saying when there's these lower power level formats, you have a bigger delta and you don't speculate as much, because instead of it being 6.5 versus 6.3 in the case that he's describing here, it might be 6.5 versus like 4 because you barely got to 23 playables or something like that. This is why, as a general rule, the more playables you have in a format, the more you are allowed to speculate on picks, because the chance that you will end up with a card to replace whatever you didn't pick is very low. If you usually end up with 23 to 24 playables, then throwing 2 or 3 of those away will mean your deck ends up with a very bad card in it, which is something we're always hoping to avoid. Therefore, the cost of speculating is high. If you always end up with 28 to 29 playables, then the cost of throwing 2 or 3 of those away is minimal because you wouldn't be playing them anyway. I wonder why he highlighted Twisted Abomination here. Maybe he's talking about you don't want to play Abomination cards. This card's actually like pretty solid, I think. I'm someone who tries to stay open as much as possible during the draft. A lot of the time, if you look at my pool of cards at the end of pack 1, it's indistinguishable from a sealed booster. I often end up with 23 playables on the dot, sometimes 22. Sealed boosters, of course, have like color distributions in them. So he's saying that after pack 1, he's got lots of different colors in his deck. If a format has a particularly low density of playables, then I need to force myself to commit earlier than I otherwise would, because if I don't adjust to it, I end up with 18-ish playables in 2 colors and my deck becomes an abomination. Ah, that's why he said uses Twisted Abomination. I see, I just had to wait to see why he chose a certain card. In formats with a deeper pool of playables, I'm usually fine. Factor 2. How replaceable is a particular effect in the format? Cards don't have value in a vacuum. They are always inserted into your deck, and depending on what else you have, other cards get better and worse. For example, a 2-drop that might ordinarily have a value of 6 might be a 7 in your deck because you don't have many 2-drops. Similarly, a removal spell that's ordinarily an 8 might become a 6 for you because you already have a lot of other removal spells. So filling the key roles of your deck is very important. You want to make sure you have a mana curve, you want to make sure you have enough removal, but going overboard on any one particular card type can lower ones of the future in the future. That's why oftentimes early in a draft, it's nice to take 2-drops over cards of similar power level so that you have kind of your quota of 2-drops made and you can like make the like picks later that you want based on power level versus having to take the 2-drop. Because if you don't have enough 2-drops, you're going to get crushed. But if you have the 2-drops already, you can afford to take the good cards later. That's why oftentimes there's like a heuristic, which is another way. Heuristic is like another word of saying like default option or good like general pattern to have. There's often a heuristic of taking the cheaper card over the more expensive card when it's a close pick because you want to have that flexibility later to not have to take the 2-drop or something like that. Removal spells, similarly, oftentimes you won't have too much removal because other players are prioritizing removal, but there have been formats and particular color combinations within formats, so sometimes like black-red might just have tons of good removal spells, and so you don't need to prioritize it as highly because you can have, as he said, a removal spell that would be an 8 becomes a 6 because you have like 6 other removal spells, and what you really need is 2-drop creatures or a finisher or things like that. Therefore, it's not only a matter of how replaceable the intrinsic value of the card is, but also how replaceable its role in your deck is. For example, imagine a card that's a 5-mana 6/6 Trampler. That's normally a good card. It's aggressively costed, you want to play it, it might be worth picking, but say that the format also has 2 other 5-mana 6/5 Tramplers with assorted irrelevant abilities, all common and in your colors. In this spot, it's likely that if you want these cards, you'll be able to get them. No one wants to play a million 5-drops. So basically he's saying the other players aren't going to just snap up all the 5-drops, so you should be able to see one later. So what you are gaining by picking the 6/6 is not the full value of the 6/6, but the difference between a 6/6 and a 6/5 Trampler, plus whatever it costs you to make this pick later on, which will usually be minor in this case, because later picks have less value than earlier picks, generally speaking. While a 6/6 for 5 might be good, its value above replacement is not actually that high because the difference between a 6/5 and a 6/6 is low. In this scenario, there being a lot of other good 5-drops means you should lower your 5-drop priority for this particular format, even if the intrinsic value of the card has not changed. However, if there are a lot of 5 damage removal spells in the format, then all of a sudden the difference between a 6/6 and a 6/5 might become quite high. In this spot, the value above replacement of the 6/6 is now big, which might make it worth picking over a speculative pick. So he shows off Artillerize, which is a card that deals 5 to a creature or player, Brimstone Volley, which can deal 5 to a creature or player, Choose Your Weapon, which deals 5 damage to target creature with flying, and Acceptable Losses, which deals 5 damage to target creature. And as an additional cost, you discard a card at random from your hand. You can see which card was oldest. If you just were reading these cards, they didn't have the art or the text, you could probably tell which one of these is the oldest, because one of them is 4-mana sorcery, deals 5 to a creature, and like you have to discard a card at random from your hand. And one of them is like Brimstone Volley is like deal 3, but if a creature died this turn, it deals 5, and it's instant speed and costs 3 mana. So like these cards are not all on the same level, which is kind of funny. Anyway, factor 3. I'm enjoying the card images a great deal. They're enhancing my enjoyment of this article. In the strategy is the real meat and potatoes. I'm loving it. Factor 3. How synergy-based is the format? As a general rule, the more synergy-based a format is, the more it pays off to speculate, because that's when you really reap the rewards of being in the open colors. Imagine, for example, that the best black cards are all removal spells that can be played in any black deck, and can often be splashed for. In this scenario, even if you identify that black is relatively open, say 2 drafters out of 8, you're still not going to get all the best black cards because there is someone else fighting for them, and because other people might splash them. Even if you read the table well, you're still not going to be wheeling a premium removal spell. The reward for your gamble is smaller, which means you should not pay a big cost for the speculation. So basically he's saying that if the best black cards are all removal spells, you're not going to be getting those late regardless, because somebody's going to snap them up, especially if they're splashable. So like, not only are all of the black players interested in them, but also all of the blue-green players are interested in them. It's just how the game is going to play out when that's like not a synergy based card. It's just like a good black card, or it works for any color. If it's just like a good red card, like a good burn spell in red, or a good removal spell in white, or a solid white 2-drop that all the white decks are going to want. Things like that. Fertile imagination. Now imagine that this is a tribal format, which is now called Kindred, and there are black cleric decks and black zombie decks. Now, the best black common might not be a generically powerful removal spell, but a cleric lord that only cleric decks want. A lord is a shorthand term for a card that buffs other creatures of that creature type, or helps them in some other way. So a very classic lord would be something like, I think it's named after Lord of Atlantis, which is like a 2-mana merfolk that gives other merfolk +1/+1, and I think Island Walk too. But anyway, a lord is a card, like, so a cleric lord would be a card that only cleric decks want, because it'll be like a 3-mana 3/3 cleric that gives other clerics some minor ability, and so it's like other decks don't care about that really because they won't have the clerics. This means that if you identify that black clerics is open, the rewards can be tremendous because no one else wants that card. The other black drafters are not interested because they aren't clerics tribal, or clerics kindred, and the multicolored green drafters obviously don't want to splash it. In this scenario, the potential payoff for speculating correctly can be so big that it can be worth giving up a solid playable for the chance of getting the big reward. So basically, you're not going to splash a clerics tribal deck if you're not playing clerics, and you're also like not going to play it if you're not playing a clerics black deck. So if it's like black white clerics as a deck, then you can get a really good black card for your clerics deck, but you wouldn't necessarily. You can maybe get it later because other black decks can't use it, and green decks aren't splashing it, things like that. This is also true for formats that are heavy on powerful multicolored cards. You'll never be the only black drafter at the table, but you could be the only black-green drafter. And if there are a lot of powerful cards that only black-green drafters want, you will be able to get all of them if you identify the right spot, which makes the rewards for correctly speculating bigger. So if there's more multicolored cards, you can get more rewarded. Why did it choose Fertile Imagination? Choose a card type, they reveal their hand, put 2 saplings into play for each card of the chosen type. Interesting. So I guess if they're like Fertile Imagination, I guess if you're trying to imagine something, or there's scenarios, I don't know. It's always interesting to see why they pick certain cards to highlight. But I guess if someone has a lot of like a certain card type in their hand, you can get a lot of saplings. So good to know with Fertile Imagination. Anyway, if somebody figures out why they chose this card, leave it in the comments below, because I am trying to decipher all of these things, and this one's a little bit more of a mystery. Factor 4. How good is what you already have, and how flat is the power level of the rest of the set? This is a bit obvious, but the stronger the cards you already have are in the context of the set, the more you should attach yourself to them. If the 4 red-white cards you already have are amazing, then the benefits of finding another open lane are diminished. You already have everything you need, so there's no reason to be looking somewhere else. So again, we're going back to that earlier scenario where we were talking about the red-white start to the draft, where you're maybe taking the blue card or taking the solid red card. If you have a motley crew of red-white cards, and there's a lot of power to be found in the rest of the format, then giving yourself flexibility becomes more attractive. Okay, knowledge is power makes sense as a card to choose here, just because knowledge is power, and reading this article has given you more power. This is especially pronounced in formats where the rares are strong and the rest of the format is relatively flat and weak. Imagine, for example, that you open a red-white multicolored card that's a 9, so 9 out of 10. In a format where several uncommons and some commons are 8s, it might pay off to take a monocolored card and leave yourself open to the rewards of very late uncommons and commons in that color. If most of the commons and uncommons are flat at 6, however, then you should just take the red-white multicolored card, because the upside for identifying the open colors just isn't there. You will get a bunch of 6s anyway, which is the same you'd get if you stayed in red-white. Which is generally going to be true unless it's a situation where all the cards are 6s and some of the cards are like 1s, and then you kind of want to find the open deck, because 1-9 plus a bunch of 1s isn't going to get the job done. But if it's going to be like 1-9 and then a bunch of 6s, or 1-9 and then, or like 1-7 and a bunch of 6s, like it depends on the power of the lowest level of the cards as well. But generally what he's saying makes a lot of sense. Like if you're not going to be able to see anything as powerful as the 9, because you're looking for like average power level of your deck. So like the 9 gives a huge benefit, because Magic cards, it's like there's a lot of 6s and 7s and stuff, but there's not really that many 9s and 10s. So having one of those in your deck can be really good. One phrase that I often like to use is, if a card has a chance to be the best card in your deck, it's often worth speculating on, because if it can be the best best card in your deck that can make a huge difference for you. Whereas speculating on a card that's like not as good as the cards you already have, or maybe isn't like, even if you are in those colors, isn't going to be one of your best cards, it makes a little bit less sense. But generally he's saying you're going to get a bunch of 6s anyway, which is the same you'd get if you stayed in red-white. Normally, we might be wary of the scenario where you pick a multicolored card and can't play it. However, if the power level of everything else is the same, then that scenario will never happen. Once you pick the red-white bomb, you know you will play it because there's no reason not to. The reward for staying open is that you can get strong cards in other colors, but you already have the strongest card right now, and everything else is pretty much the same. Even if blue is more open than red-white, all that this means is that you will see more blue cards, but not necessarily better blue cards, because the power level is flat. So the red-white cards you see are going to be equally as good, even if there aren't as many of them. In this spot, you just first pick the bomb and put the blinders on, pretend the other colors don't even exist. He's probably oversimplifying a little bit here, but generally speaking, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you're not going to see any better cards, even if you have more blue options, you can still only take one card out of each pack. And if they're all going to be 6s anyway, you might as well. It's still in the back of my head, fertile imagination. It's probably just like fertile imagination, like thinking about things like speculation. I don't know. How many cards on the table, gamble, big cost for he's talking about speculation because fertile imagination, you're speculating on what's in your opponent's hand, or imagine the tribal format. I don't know. Probably that speculating thing. Yeah. Anyway, factor 5. Is there something you might expect to table? When we open a pack, our first priority is to figure out what we're picking. But after that, we also need to pay attention to what we're sending our neighbors, which is something that I would say is generally not as important, especially if you're just like not drafting at like the highest of levels, because you don't even know if the person you're passing to is necessarily experienced enough to really understand what's going on at the same level. But it is definitely a factor. It's just not the most important factor. You should still be trying to draft your best deck, because oftentimes when you think about what you're passing to your neighbor, you can overthink things and you make weird picks that like end up hurting you in the long run. But just generally, we'll go through what he says about this as well. What we also need to pay attention to what we're sending our neighbors. If a pack is particularly strong, then there are good chances you will table a good card, which means you will get a chance to take a card that you opened the second time around. So if it's a good pack, because there'll be enough good cards left still. Paying attention to what might be coming can help you make a speculating decision. One example of this was my draft at the World Championship a couple of years ago. I'm not going to go into much detail since no one even remembers the format, but we can note that my first pick of the draft had a card called Seize the Storm, which is from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. I didn't take the Seize the Storm, but I made a mental note of it. It's not an incredibly powerful card, so I'm not going to first pick it, and no one might actually want it, but it can be strong in the right deck, usually if you have multiples and can build around them. Instead, I took the more generically powerful Borrowed Time, which is a 3-mana exile removal spell for a non-land permanent. It's a pretty typical white removal spell. We've even seen this at common since then, but it was an uncommon back then. And then Seize the Storm is a card that fits at its best into a deck that has a lot of instants and sorceries, because you get a creature token with power and toughness equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard plus the number of flashback cards you own in exile, and it has flashback. So it's like really good in like a blue-red spells deck maybe, but not like a generically powerful red card. So that's a card type he's been talking about a lot in this article. After this, I took a black card, then another, and then a black-white multicolored card, and by pick 7, I had the shell of a strong black-white deck. I also had a blue and a green card because I am me, but these colors dried up pretty early, and I locked in, and it looked like black-white was likely the place I was going to end up. I had no red cards at all. Then I saw a pack that had a playable but not great white card, Celestis Sanctifier. So if we hover over this card, let's zoom up here. It's like a 3-mana, like random 3/2 guy. It doesn't give you like, it's not like a crazy card. It's a card that you generally weren't super happy playing. Anyway, a reasonable black sideboard card, Duress, which is like a very typical black sideboard card. It just reveals their hand, uses a non-creature non-land card, so definitely more of a sideboard card. And another copy of Seize the Storm. So the Seize the Storm card is the card that we already talked about, that we already saw. It gives you the flashback options, and it's like pretty good in blue-red spells. Now, was I likely to end up with a Seize the Storm deck? Not really, but it was still possible, because even pick 8, you can still make a big change. A standalone Seize the Storm is not going to be enough to justify building a Seize the Storm deck at this point in the draft, but 2 of them might be. It's a build-around, and therefore it gets heavily empowered in multiples, because if you have a build-around card, building around it makes more sense if you have multiples, because you want to be able to draw your build around card more consistently, because if you build your deck around a card and then don't draw it, your deck is generally a little weaker. So getting multiples of your build around is great. If I take it, there's a chance I table the one I opened, and then if that happens, there's a chance that there is a powerful Seize the Storm deck for the taking, and that deck can be mine. If I don't take it here, then I'm 0% to have that deck if it exists. And then he shows Duress. And so I took it, and the Seize the Storm I opened did not table, and I never saw another red card again. The final product probably ended up a little worse off because I didn't take it. I'd have maybe sideboarded in duress in one of the matches, for example, but I don't think my decision was wrong. I willingly paid a small cost to reap a potential great upside that would otherwise be completely inaccessible to me, and I think that is generally a good thing to do. So it didn't work out this time, but he did it at the World Championships, which is the highest level of competition, and he really wanted to win, obviously, the World Championships. And it didn't work out, but he still did it anyway, and he still thinks it was correct. And nice that they used card examples that actually were relevant and being discussed in that section. I don't have to worry about those ones at all. Conclusion. So, to sum it all up, sometimes it will pay off to stick to your first picks and continue drafting cards of the same color, and sometimes it will pay off to give up a little bit of value in your colors to speculate on a potential powerful deck in a different direction. As a general rule, you should speculate more if the format is deeper, has more playables, the format is synergy-based or has a lot of multicolored cards, meaning not everyone wants the same cards, even if they share a color, and the payoffs are usually powerful. The card you're giving up has an effect or role that can easily be replaceable by other cards you can expect to see throughout the draft, such as one of many 5-drops. There's a lot of variety in the power of the commons and uncommons, with some of those approaching the rares. That makes you want to speculate more as well. You have reason to believe a certain deck might be up for the taking, depending on what you passed. You should speculate less if the format is shallow, meaning you might scrap for playables meaning you might scrap for playables as is, and therefore you can't waste picks speculating. The best cards are all generically powerful, meaning they will be picked by anyone in those colors, and even by some people outside of them. The card you're giving up plays an important role that is not easily replaceable, such as a removal spell in a removal light color. The rares are very strong, but the power level after that is flat, and you first picked a rare. So those are all reasons to speculate less. There is no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to this issue of picking a card in your colors or speculating in a different direction, and you will run into it again and again, but hopefully this article has given you some direction as to what you need to be thinking about when it comes the time to make the decision. Let's just read that last sentence again. Gives you some direction as to what you need to be thinking about when it comes the time to make this decision. See you soon, PV. And then, of course, about the author, one of the most accomplished Magic players of all time, world champion in 2020, player of the year in 2017. He's tied for the most top finishes in history with 17 appearances. Yeah, player of the year as well. Yeah, I didn't mention that at the top, but yeah, he's fantastic. He's a really good player, and he's also a fantastic writer, as you hopefully now realize after going through this fantastic article. So if you made it to the end of the video, in the comments section down below, leave hashtag the correct way, because hopefully you now understand a lot more about drafting the correct way, and you'll be able to apply some of these principles in your own drafts. As I said, this article was written in 2024. So it's more recent than some of the article breakdowns I've covered, but that doesn't mean but that means it's even more relevant because it was written from a modern context and gives you, or maybe not more relevant, but that means that a lot of the examples and things he's talking about are written with all of the current history of draft and maybe a lot of the state of the game in mind. And so it's a really great article, a really great read. And I really do hope you enjoyed it and found my analysis helpful as well. That's going to do it for this one though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time.